Good morning. Welcome to the Madrona Group's 15-minute forms, where we pick a form to talk about for 15 minutes in hopes to develop a better understanding of it and how to use it in our transactions. Today, I wanted to talk about Form 22EF, which is the evidence of funds. Well, what is it? It is a form that we use to disclose where the funds are coming from when somebody writes up a purchase and sale agreement. And I just wanted to pull up the form right here because it's just a one-page form and it's more of a disclosure than anything else. It doesn't necessarily create contingencies. It discloses where the funds are coming from. And on the options here, you have the options of either having contingent funds or non-contingent funds. I'm going to talk about the difference between the two of those and what it means to your buyer and your seller in a minute. But essentially, what we want to make sure in every transaction is that we have disclosed how the buyer is going to be paying for it. So when should you include this? Well, unless you have something else in your transaction that shows that your buyer is paying for it a different way, we want to account for 100% of where the money is coming from. So looking back at the form itself and thinking about a transaction that we might be in, if the buyer is financing, then the buyer has given you as the seller the information of where that money is coming from. Now, if the buyer is financing but has a significant down payment, it would be a very smart idea for you to ask that buyer where that down payment is coming from. Is the buyer coming with cash that's already liquidated and ready to go? Is the buyer going to be liquidating stocks in order to do this, or are they going to be borrowing that down payment? So anytime you have a transaction, make sure that when you look at it as an entire piece and an entire whole transaction, and you want to account for where 100% of that money is coming from. So why use it? Well, we have a clause in our purchase and sale agreement that says that unless otherwise disclosed, the buyer is coming to the table with 100% cash to buy the property. Now, if your buyer does not have 100% cash to buy the property, you do need to disclose where the money is coming from. And as a seller, it's good to know that your buyer does actually either have the cash or will be getting the money. You don't necessarily need to put this in a transaction where you've already given evidence of funds. So if you have a cash purchase and you bring that offer to the table and you include like a bank statement showing that they have the funds, you don't need to include the paperwork that says they have the funds. This is just a piece of paper that can be added into the transaction if they have not given you proof of funds and you want to be able to ask for that. A savvy seller will know where their buyer's money is coming from, and they're going to know when it's expected to be there. So let's look at this really quick together. The evidence of funds, you would fill out the transaction information from lines 1 through 4. It does have a space for definitions. And with these, the evidence of funds needs to be in a U.S. banking institution in liquid cash. So this means in a checking or savings account or something that is readily available to withdraw the money. And non-contingent funds mean the buyer has the possession but needs to make an action for that to, non-contingent funds means that the buyer has the possession. Contingent funds means that the buyer has the money but needs to make one more step or something, an action needs to be done in order to receive those funds to be able to use. This could be something as simple as I'm getting a gift from my grandma for the down payment. So the action needed to take place is grandma needs to transfer the money into my account, and then I can pay it out of my account. That would be considered contingent funds. Another example of contingent funds might be stocks that need to be liquidated into readily available cash. So anytime you are asking your buyer how they're going to pay, make sure you're keeping in mind they are either contingent or non-contingent funds. Now, if the buyer has cash in a savings account ready to go, already liquidated funds, you're going to select box number 2. This means that you have the way to provide proof of these funds within the default of 3 days after mutual acceptance. So liquid cash should be something that is readily available with no extra steps needed in order to take that money and use it. If this is something they have in a bank account, you just put your 3 days here, or you provide a bank statement similar to how you would provide a pre-approval letter. Now, if an action needs to take place in order to liquidate the funds, then you're going to disclose them under the disclosure of contingent funds box. Now, there's a couple things I wanted to talk about in this selection, but first I'm going to skip over a couple of these to note the gift from somebody is contingent. If they need to sell something, like if they need to sell a boat or a car in order to get a down payment, the funds not available or not readily convertible to US funds are things like 401ks, stock accounts. If you're using the down payment assistance program, you can put it here. I will caution you though, if you are also using a 22A and the buyer is obtaining a loan that you want a contingency out for, this is not the place to put that. You do not select the loan if you have a 22A. Similarly, if your buyer is using the down payment assistance program, you do not select the down payment program on an evidence of funds form. You keep all of it on 22A. And the reason is the evidence of funds is not a contingency. It is only a disclosure. So if you intend to protect your buyer as a contingency protects your buyer, then do not disclose the same funds on the evidence of funds form as you do elsewhere in your contract. That can also be said about the gift or the sale of the following from the buyer. If the buyer has to sell a home, you would typically put a 22B in your contract or a 22Q. If those are in your contract and you want a contingency protection for your buyer, do not include those things on the sale of the following under your evidence of funds page. Now, the whole reason for this is just for the seller to keep communication and to know where the money is coming from. Box 3 for contingent funds is one of our only timelines that actually count from closing date backwards. So that being said, keep in mind the time that you need to use to convert those to liquid funds, and you can provide evidence when that happens. But what happens when these timelines to provide proof of these funds come and go, and the buyer can't provide that? Well, this is not a contingency out. The buyer does not get off the hook because they just don't have the money at the end. What it does do is it notifies the seller and lets the seller know that, hey, the timeline to see these evidence of funds has come and gone, and your buyer has not provided that. Now, if we're in a market where the seller has other offers coming in that they don't want to let slip away, the seller can terminate the contract. If the seller terminates the contract, though, it is not the buyer's fault and the buyer will retain the earnest money. If the seller does not terminate and the buyer can't close because any one of their these sources of funds didn't fall through, then the buyer is buyer's on the hook. The buyer did not have a contingency out for these. The buyer was only disclosing where the money was coming from. The buyer's earnest money will not be protected. Okay, so when should you not include it? I just wanted to touch on that one more time, though. Anytime you are using another source to disclose those funds within your transaction. If you have a 22A, you don't redisclose the same funds here. So everything just gets disclosed one time. Okay. If anybody has any questions about the 22EF, please feel free to reach out. Keep in mind that if you are putting a buyer contract together, we just want to keep track of where 100% of the funds are coming from. So if the buyer's putting 20% down, you will want to have an evidence of funds for that 20%. And then your financing contingency for the loan, the rest of the loan. If you have any questions on how to craft your offer, I will be here to help. Thank you for listening.